Dallas Football Podcast. My name's George Winkler, and I'm here with Bill Bender and Sean Merriman. Week 7 is in the books, and we had plenty of injuries to talk about. But before we get to that, I'd just like to say the guy who's usually in this chair, David A. Arnott, got married over the weekend and is on his honeymoon in Charleston, South Carolina. So here's a shout-out to David. If you're listening, we'll keep the seat warm for you. And speaking of hot seats, we got no Sean Moreno in Denver. Can he handle it? Willis McGahee is out for 1 to 2 weeks with a fractured hand. Bill Bender, should we get excited about Moreno again?
Well, this is kind of like his second chance or even third chance. I don't know what chance he's on, and I say you got to trust him. Just for a couple weeks, maybe he gets back. He was a pretty good running back last year. He does things out of the backfield. He might be more well-suited for that offense now that Tim Tebow's under center. Those are my thoughts. But that being said, I'm the same owner that dropped him a couple weeks ago and left him for dead, and I traded him in another league. So if he does do a good job, it'll be for other owners' benefit and not mine.
Hey, Sean, do you think that Tim Tebow is going to be a factor, like cutting into Moreno's work, Lance Ball, or is Moreno going to really get it done?
I think that if anything, Tebow probably helps him a little. With a second-year quarterback that isn't accustomed to starting that much, I think that they're going to want to still run the ball. With that said, obviously Moreno struggled at the start of the season. There is a reason that McGahee was in there starting after being a primary backup for the past couple years. So it might be a slow process, but Moreno's also a pretty good receiver out of the backfield, which I think will help him. And you saw 2 weeks ago when Tebow hooked up with him on that touchdown, which got them both going there.
Well, moving from Denver to a former Denver coach who has his own injury problems, we're talking about Mike Shanahan in Washington. Tim Hightower's out for the season. Santana Moss out for 5 to 7 weeks with a fractured hand. Bill, is this finally the news that Ryan Terrain owners have been looking for?
I think he's the worst person in the world. I really do. I mean,
talking about Shanahan, not Ryan Terrain.
No, both of them. Yeah, the worst people in the world. Ryan Terrain, the last 2 weeks, I've put him in there in the flex thinking, okay, he's got a great matchup. He's going to get the carries. That's amounted to 12 carries for 17 yards the last 2 weeks. And here we go this week. He has another great matchup against Buffalo. So the week that a lot of owners, I think, are going to sit him, he'll end up going off against the Bills. He's such a – there's just not a word I can say in here about him. I mean, he's just a guy that you got to put in there this week. He's going to be frustrating. Mike Shanahan obviously loves the guy. And at least Hightower, you don't want to say it's a good thing he's injured and out for the year, but at least it opens up the door. Now it's either Terrain or Halou.
Yeah. Why do I get the feeling that Halou's going to be that guy instead of Ryan Terrain? As far as the receivers, Sean, Santana Moss is out. John Beck's the quarterback. Are any of those receivers worth picking up, or is this just a mess to avoid?
I would say it sounds like a situation to avoid altogether if you can. Anthony Armstrong's a guy that'll plug in there, and he's kind of been a big play threat at times. But, again, nothing that should be even considered for your starting lineup going forward.
Okay, well, that's the situation in Washington. We got one more injury to hit here. And, Bill, I know you're from Big Ten country. Both you guys are from Big Ten country. You're familiar with Beanie Wells, his injury history. It finally happened. Here he is with a knee sprain, out probably this week, maybe longer. What do you guys think of his backups? And then just Wells, can he bounce back from this?
Well, the thing was he was ranked 15th among running backs in fantasy points before another injury. So it's not can he finally stay healthy. He doesn't stay healthy. He's been hurt twice this year. He's probably going to get hurt again after another couple weeks. He's just not a person I can trust. And to be honest, Sean, I don't trust anybody for the Cardinals right now. I don't trust Kevin Cobb. He has 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. I don't trust any of those guys against what's going to be a very angry Baltimore defense this week.
Do you think any of those guys, LaRod Stevens-Howling in a PPR league, Sean, has any value at all here?
Well, certainly not against Baltimore this week. I think that that's kind of a dead point where neither of them should be in your starting lineup and perhaps rostered. In order to get a guy like Smith or someone else that's going to fill in there, you're going to have to make a waiver move, and I'm not sure that that's worth the spot right now. Beanie Wells, they mentioned that he was probably going to be out 1 to 2 weeks. Then yesterday, the prognosis changed that he went from not playing to possibly doubtful now that there is a small chance. So if you're an owner, I would look somewhere else, especially for this week with a very tough matchup for Arizona.
Well, those are some of the injury updates for this week. For more, go to fantasysource.com because there were a slew of them in Week 7. When we come back from the break, it's the midpoint of the season and we're starting to get frustrated with some quarterbacks. Let's see if some of these guys can bounce back or if they should be trade bait when we come back. Okay, we're back from the break and we're talking about struggling quarterbacks. And one of the guys at the top of the list is Phillip Rivers. And this is a guy, Bill, that you spent a pretty high pick on in the expert league. You have to be really frustrated with this guy right now.
Well, at least I got lucky and took Cam Newton behind him. And I have been starting Cam Newton the last couple weeks over Rivers. Now it's become a 50-50 decision, whereas early in the season I was starting Rivers every week no matter what because I thought he would get over things. The guy still ranks 11th in the league in passing yards, but it's that 7 touchdowns to 9 interception ratio that's just killing him. It's killing the Chargers. They should probably be, they could be better than they are as a team. But I like him going forward, George. You look at his schedule over the next few weeks. He's got Kansas City, 17th in pass defense. After that, Green Bay, Oakland, Chicago. Those teams rank 27th or lower. So after those 4 weeks, if Phillip Rivers is still struggling, then we'll have a big problem.
Sean, do you agree with Bill? I mean, this is a guy with a tremendous track record. He has 2 single-digit scoring games this year. He had 1 last year. He had none the year before. So this is how consistent this guy has been. Is there other rays of hope that we could see from Phillip Rivers in the next couple weeks?
I think that something that people might be overlooking with Rivers is just the fact that he's had so many injuries around him. Obviously, last year that was the case, and you saw him get it done. But last year he also had Gates at times. I mean, he's been without Gates for the majority of this year. Vincent Jackson continues to be banged up. Ryan Matthews is, just as big of a question as those two. He can go down any week. So I think that now it seems like if they can get Jackson healthy, maintain Gates and Matthews, he'll be able to practice with his big guns, and that should only help him along with that favorable schedule that Bill was talking about.
Moving on to Atlanta with Matt Ryan. I mean, the Falcons, they took a big gamble. They moved up into the draft and added Julio Jones. We thought this was the year that Matt Ryan would finally break out. Bill, Arthur Blank doesn't have Cam Newton behind Matt Ryan like you do. What should fantasy owners do with Matt Ryan right now?
Well, as you know, by sitting through me since the time Matt Ryan has come into the league, I've never liked him as a fantasy quarterback. I've never drafted him as one because he's one of those guys that I just don't see in that offense where Michael Turner is the key. They got to run first. I mean, yeah, he'll hit Roddy White or Julio Jones but look at how many guys he has around him, and he's not putting up big numbers. So I don't trust him as a fantasy starter moving forward, and I don't really care what their schedule is, George. I just don't.
Okay, and Sean, do you agree with that too, or is Matt Ryan someone to buy low on at this point?
I'm in a league where Matt Ryan actually just got released, so that's how people are thinking about him right now. I assume that some of that maybe has to do with Julio Jones and this lingering hamstring injury, but we expect that he will come back soon. Reports came out last week that after they've seemed to have so much recent success with Michael Turner and running the ball, they're going to turn into a run-first team where we saw them aired out possibly more than any team in the league early on here with that receiver duo. So look for them to try to continue to pound it out with Turner on the ground, and that certainly decreases Ryan's value. I wouldn't go ahead and say that I'd release him, but I think that there are certainly, 12 better starting options going forward.
Yeah, and another guy who was right down on that borderline of the 12 starters was Joe Flacco. And he started out great. He had 2-3 touchdown games in the first 3 weeks of the season, but he's been subpar ever since, and it bottomed out last night in Jacksonville. Bill, is Joe Flacco just kind of destined to be a number 2 quarterback in a rotation, or can he finally snap out of this?
Well, I could basically repeat every word I just said about Matt Ryan and put Joe Flacco's name in that same sense. I feel the exact same way about him. Ryan and him came in the league at the same time. They're just in favorable situations. Again, the Ravens, the key to their offense is Ray Rice. That defense, short fields. It's not Joe Flacco going out and throwing for 350 yards. And I'll tell you this, George, I will never trust either one of those guys to carry my team until they show me a 4,000-yard, 30-touchdown season. That's kind of the benchmark I hold quarterbacks up to. Neither one of those guys has reached that yet. And until they do, I'll continue to pass on them on draft day.
Now, Flacco has been subpar, but he does have a pretty nice matchup this week, Sean, against Arizona. Is this Flacco, is he kind of like a boom or bust wide receiver now? He can throw a nice deep ball, and maybe this is the time that he booms this week.
I think that's pretty much how it is. When you talk about inconsistency, Joe Flacco pretty much, describes that word spot on this year so far. We saw last year, Jacksonville had one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL the past couple of years, and they absolutely held Flacco in check to one of the worst performances I've ever seen in his career. That might be an understatement. So, yeah, going forward, I think you look at Arizona, a pretty weak secondary, a nice matchup for him. But again, am I going to start him over, say, another mid-range quarterback? Probably not.
Well, there you go. Joe Flacco, Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers, you've been put on notice. But when we come back from the break, a little brighter side here. We're going to look for some sleepers to pick up for Week 8, and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back from the break with a little brighter side here with sleepers for Week 8. The injuries have given us some opportunity to come up with some guys that might step up in the lineup this week, Bill, and you got one who's playing the Rams.
Yeah, the Rams' run defense is atrocious, which was proven last week where they made DeMarco Murray the franchise record holder for the Cowboys in a single game for rushing yards. And with Mark Ingram banged up and Darren Sproles just a steady fantasy play, I think Pierre Thomas could be that goal line back for the Saints, maybe put up some numbers, catch a few screens, put up a lot more yards than he normally does, and be that guy that you can put in the flex that has a big game for you.
That sounds good. And how about at wide receiver? You had one, Sean.
Yeah, when Demaryius Thomas is a guy for Denver who had been injured coming into this year, and he's come back. It seems like he's healthy. He showed to have a pretty nice connection with Tim Tebow in their last week's game. I believe he had 10-plus targets, and this is against the Detroit secondary that's been all right. They've had Chris Houston got banged up a little bit, and I think that's a nice matchup, and look for that connection between Thomas and Tebow to continue to prosper going forward.
All right, that sounds good, guys. Some good sleepers for the week, and that's the Fantasy Source podcast for Week 8. Thank you.